Hey YouTube, I wanted to stop by today and talk a little bit about Platonism and the theory of forms and land of forms. It's been a while since I've talked about that specifically. And with forms, the best way to think of that is, I think, is probably ideas, perfect ideas. And so when you're talking about, like, when we're looking on the screen, you see light, or if you look outside with the sun or starlight or moonlight, what have you, those are all versions of light that are bad copies of the ultimate form of light, the ultimate idea of light, which exists in the land of forms, or heaven. So, and with Platonism, he's a little bit contrary on his position as to exactly how these were created, but he seems to think that there was chaos, like Hesiod in his theogony, and that chaos ended up spawning a handful of forms, and those handful of forms made up God, the ultimate good God, and the ultimate good God created the rest of the forms, and eventually the universe, either directly or indirectly, created the universe based on the forms, essentially. So these forms, which are ideas of God, end up being the model for the external universe. And so when we see, like I said earlier, when you see light on the screen, that's a bad, really bad copy of the ultimate model, which was the form of light in before the creation of the universe and everything. And so these forms come from chaos, they make up God, and then God makes the rest of the forms and eventually the universe. And the question of the forms is really about what God is now. What is the nature of God now? And what was the nature, before creation and that sort of thing. And so with these other theologies like Judaism, and I'm going to talk about Philo here a little bit, they redefine their theology through Platonic forms. So Philo comes along, and he, when in his text on the creation, I think it's important to note that on the creation, he's actually making an argument for Yahweh being the good God, the ultimate good God. But in Philo's book on the creation, all he does is he takes the book of Genesis and reads it through Platonic forms. So where it says in the beginning, let's see, when it said, God said, let there be light, according to Philo, that was God, his intellect, producing the form of light, okay, which we can call the phos. I like to use the Greek terms for the forms. But and then he goes on through and creates all these forms, and then poof, he poofs in the universe, the external universe, based on the forms. It's exactly the same stuff. Philo is a Platonist. Now there are different details, because Plato does not have a chaos concept. I'm sorry, Plato does. Philo does not have a chaos concept. For him, God had logos and spirit, and he was infinite. So there's the difference right there. But they're still using forms. And this is kind of the magic of Plato, really, is that when Plato hits these other theologies, they all have the same questions. What is our God like? What is the nature of our God? And the Philo's answer is, well, our God can think, so he has intellect. And our God can act, so he has spirit, And then how do you read it in the text? Well, the first thing he creates was the form of light, and they go on down through the forms, and then poof, the universe. Very simple stuff. Then it goes, and this drifts into the Johannine theology, where it says in John 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Well, that's the Logos. In the beginning was the Logos. That's the intellect or Word, and it was with God and was God. Well, that goes back to Philo. That's exactly what he's saying. Logos was there in the beginning with God. God had, at the very beginning, the ability to think. And keep going on down with John, it talks about the true light, creating the light, and then the true light was coming into the world. Well, what's the true light? That's the form of light from Genesis 1:3, where it says, God said, let there be light, poof, form of light. John is saying that the form of light was coming into the world. So, yeah, so he takes it a little bit farther than Philo does, because Philo would not have said that. But he has the same Platonic forms as Philo does. You know, and that's exactly where this stuff comes from. It's from Philo of Alexandria, and again, Gnostic Judaism may have existed for a couple hundred years before Philo, but at least we have the Philo texts, because there's a lot of Platonism there. But that's what the Platonic forms are. They are ideas of God. They are not substance. They are perfect ideas, and you know, whether or not they can act is another story. Is a slightly different story. They seem to be able to function, to have their own ability to act and create certain things. So I would not necessarily call them deities in themselves, but some of the theologies do seem to give the forms, you know, kind of characteristics of deities. And so, yeah, I'm going to throw all that out there. And I'm also going to, I think, mention in passing that the allegory of the cave, going back to the allegory of the cave, that is really the perfect example of, I think, Platonic forms. If you think of, in that particular allegory, think of the people in the cave as living people, living human beings on Earth, and think of the person on the surface as someone who has died and gone on to the afterlife. He's looking at the forms, the people in the cave are looking at the shadows of reality, and the cave passage is the barrier of darkness between life and afterlife. This is a excellent model of Plato's theory of forms. So throw all that out there. Hopefully didn't confuse anybody, but yeah. Thanks a lot, folks. Bye.